Hello, everyone. This session is entitled Using Data Literacy to Foster Continued Excellence in Academic Growth while Addressing Pandemic Resulting Learning Gaps. And the session is recorded on March 10th, 2022. I thought it would be appropriate to open with prayer, especially because it is the season of Lent, and when you are listening to this, we will have celebrated Easter. So if you will kind of center yourself for a moment, and we will begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Loving God, bless the work of our hands, our minds, our hearts. May the work offered be a reflection of all that is good within us. In planning, creating, doing, grant us the courage to patiently listen for the stirring of your presence. Grace us with joyful moments in the midst of daily routine. Enliven our spirits with humor. Fill us with reverence for one another and gratitude for our diversity. Nourish our spirit with the awareness that work is holy. May unity, beauty, and truth be the fruit of our labor. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. My name is Kendra DeYoung, and I am representing ADAC today through this webinar. I am very passionate about the topic that we have today. I have been kind of all over the world of education. I started as a classroom teacher. I've been an administrator in both public and private, specifically in the Catholic school sector. I have done some work for ACE, the Alliance for Catholic Education, through the University of Notre Dame. And I currently am working with ADAC, and I have the pleasure of traveling around the United States and working with several Catholic schools in a variety of topics. And the data literacy is definitely one that's near and dear to my heart, and one that we're having a lot of conversations about, especially with the resulting pandemic. So thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person to share this with you, but I hope that you find this presentation helpful and relevant to what you're experiencing in your classrooms and in your school buildings and in your diocese. As we move through this today, there's three main objectives that I'm hoping that you will walk away with some understanding. And the first one is really being aware of the data-driven instructional cycle. What I'm going to talk about today is a process. And so it's never a task that is completely finished. We will always, once we kind of start reviewing data and making really good decisions based on what we see, the process only continues because then we need to actually measure if our efforts are working. I also am hoping that you will develop an understanding of how to identify learning gaps and then take some action to respond to them. And we all know that those learning gaps exist. I'm seeing it time and time again, and every educator that I talk to has a story in regards to that with the pandemic. And then I'm also hoping that we can understand today how to better focus our efforts towards student achievement, and then creating that feeling of fulfillment as educators. I know many of you are feeling frustrations at times with students in and out of the classroom, and students that were in person or students that were virtual or students that didn't really do much learning at all through the pandemic. So I'm just hoping that we can streamline with some great digging into data today, so that you will then be able to kind of step away and say, wow, I really feel like I'm working hard and my efforts are paying off. I want to explain briefly, just for practical purposes and just kind of making sure that we're all on the same page. I might refer to it as DDI, and that is data-driven instruction and inquiry. And what that is, and this is from Engage New York, is it's a precise and systematic approach to improving student learning throughout the year. The inquiry cycle of data-driven instruction includes assessment, analysis, and action, and is a key framework for school-wide support of all student success. I think that this diagram is helpful because, again, I had mentioned before that the data-driven instructional cycle is a process. It is a cycle. You're there for, it's never a task that's one and done. Check it off your list and move on. We want to create an environment where we're looking at all of the ways that students learn, looking at the best practices, looking at the resources that we have, making instructional decisions based on information that we have at our fingertips. And then I always joke with the teachers that I work with, and I say, no one wants to be working as hard as we do if it doesn't pay off, right? And so we want to make sure that all of the efforts that you are putting in planning lessons and preparing materials are actually getting us the results that we're looking for. Because I think if we continue to put in the efforts and we don't see the results, I think that borderlines on the definition of insanity. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the assessment piece. So there's three main things that if you leave today knowing that you need to go back to your classrooms or your school buildings, or even if you're at the diocesan level, there's three main things that we need to kind of have a plan for. And we need to know the assessment piece. How are we going to be gathering all of this information that's going to help inform our decision-making process? I'm going to walk you through an actual case study of a diocese that I have worked with in the past, and you're going to have an opportunity to kind of look at some of their data and make some instructional decisions based on that. And then we actually want to talk about the action and looking at then, okay, now that we know what we know, what would be the most prudent instructional approach and decisions, and then kind of looking at it too and saying, you know, together is better, and how do we unite our actions with looking at how can we kind of work together from all the way from a diocesan to the high school to the elementary to the individual classroom, and then right down to the individual student to see if our efforts are paying off. This is just a brief list. There are two types of data. There's qualitative and quantitative. For practical purposes, and because we are limited by time today, we're going to focus specifically on that first one, which is standardized assessments. We're going to be looking at trying to identify where those learning gaps occur, where we might be falling short, where students are missing some skills based on those standardized assessments, and then again, taking those into practice in the classroom to figure out the best action-based approach to address those gaps. Because we do know if we continue to do nothing, that gap is going to only widen, and probably our frustrations will only increase. So it is in our best interest to recognize the gaps. It is what it is with the pandemic, embrace them and say, how can we overcome them? One of the strategies that I talk with the teachers that I work with is to kind of keep it in perspective. I mean, it took us over 2 years to get where we are today, from, you know, about March 2020 to current times, and it's going to take us 2 to 3 years to dig out of that. So we need to recognize that, and this is not going to fix itself overnight, but there are some great practices that we can put into play to make sure that we're minimizing the effects of those pandemic gaps, and then also feeling fulfilled as teachers that we're really making a difference in the lives of our students. So when we're analyzing our data and looking at trying to figure out where do we start, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And so that's why instead of trying to fix everything all at once, and it can be very overwhelming, because I've even heard teachers say to me, I don't even know where to begin. And that is very true, because we need to probably gather some information and make some informed decisions about where we begin. And one of the examples that I can give you is sometimes results will show where steps have worked and where there's room for improvement. For example, you're going to see some of the high school information coming up, there's a certain time of year that students seem to consistently perform better on the SAT. And so obviously the results of that would be, we're going to encourage students to sign up and take the test during those months versus some of the other months. And this is the same thing, like maybe teachers realize that, I guess there's a statistic that Tuesday is the most productive day of the work week. And I've also heard it translated into the school week. So maybe it makes more sense for teachers to give assessments on Tuesdays instead of Fridays. I know as a teacher, I gave them on Fridays so that I could have the weekends to grade them. But that's a whole another reason for giving an assessment. Whereas if we're really focused on student achievement and wanting to make sure that we're giving them the best opportunity possible to show what they know. Another thing that might come up, and you're going to see this further into the presentation, is when we start breaking down the data, we might realize that in a certain grade level or a certain age group, there might be a specific standard or standards in a domain. If we look at math or we look at reading or writing and we start to break that down, that we're just not getting at. And this has happened numerous times in dioceses that I've worked with, is that geometry tends to be a weaker area. And that was prior to the pandemic. So I can only imagine as we're trying to figure out, how we're going to teach and what kids might be gathering or gaining from being taught at home or virtual or online. We probably missed some things along the way. And geometry was always one of those, because as we're moving through the textbook, geometry always comes at the very end. And even in a good year, we know that it can be difficult to get to the end of a textbook. And so numerous dioceses that I've worked with, as they start to peel back the layers of this, they've realized that, wow, we're really falling short in geometry. And it's only been more exaggerated because of the pandemic. So, in a normal classroom, there's some opportunities for spiral reviews. So some of that geometry, at least from years prior, might have been kind of woven into the curriculum. But with the pandemic, we're seeing that geometry is even more lacking, because now we've had 2 years where it hasn't even been really addressed within the math curriculum that was being provided online or at home per se. This is a statement that I think is really important, and it's just the fact that data-driven educational decision-making refers to the process, and there we go with that process word again, by which educators examine data to identify student strengths and deficiencies and apply those findings to their practice. And in big letters, this is where I want to emphasize the whole point of this is to help you as educators work smarter, not harder. And we want to make sure that as we're, trying to recover from the pandemic and we're trying to identify where do we begin, where do we take that bite of the elephant, that it's purposeful and it's intentional and it's based on information, and it's not just us, kind of rock, paper, scissors, what am I going to tackle first? So it becomes kind of the method to the madness. In a diocesan-wide approach, I think together is better. And so I'm kind of uniting forces and sharing ideas and looking at, how can we leverage our resources to maybe get the right individuals in for professional development. I think, it's really important that the diocese, especially now more than ever, plays an important role in helping schools identify what data they should be using and how that data is analyzed, and then what they can do with it. And like I said, kind of uniting forces to figure out the best way to go after this. And so it's sustained, it's systemic, it is student-centered. We're looking for, increased quality, capacity, culture. We want to see actions that are affecting our policy, our programming, our practices, our placements. And then obviously it kind of goes back to we're crazy if we're continuing to work as hard as we do and we're not seeing an increase in student achievement. So measuring that and making sure that our efforts are paying off. So a diocese that would say that they are very data driven can kind of articulate how they are able to start with some of those standardized assessments. They're looking at all of their student population as a whole at the diocesan level. And then we can start to peel back those layers down to the school, which I will share a couple examples with you today, down to either department or specific grade levels. We can then break it further into individual classrooms and look at where those strengths and weaknesses might be, and then start looking and targeting the individual student and personalizing that intervention or that approach or that instruction to make sure that we're using the student's best time, or I'm sorry, the student's time is in our best interest as well, so that we're all kind of united and working for a common goal. All right, so a walk down data lane in a diocese. I'm going to share with you, I've eliminated the names just to protect privacy, but this is kind of a live example of a diocese that I am working with. And I think it's important to just kind of overview. I was really excited to have this opportunity because this particular diocese knew the importance of using data to inform instructional decisions. They just weren't sure how best to go after it, to gather the right data, and it was finding the time to have people devoted towards kind of pulling all of that together, because that can be a bit cumbersome. But I will tell you, time and time again, it is efforts well spent. You're kind of front loading, you're putting in some sweat equity in the beginning of kind of combing through that data and pulling it all together. And when you start to identify the patterns is when it really feels like that effort is paying off. So the diocese, they recognized that they needed to do that and that it was going to be very important as they were leveraging resources to make sure that it was an informed decision. Then this diocese also kind of embraced the fact that the pandemic was definitely going to be impacting their academics, and they wanted to try to get ahead of that as much as possible and start gathering that information so that they could hopefully put some practice in play that would address those student needs sooner than later. And then they also embrace the concept that all the schools and individual classrooms play an important role in identifying and implementing possible solutions. So it's kind of like an all hands on deck approach. We're going to use the complete information that we have as the diocese. We're going to funnel that down. We're going to kind of see what comes out as a clear picture for that. But then we're not, the diocese itself wasn't going to be, mandating what the schools or the individual classrooms were going to be doing to go after that. It was more of the mindset that we're going to leave it up to the professionals that are in the trenches doing the work, and we're going to track and we're going to see. I mean, if there's a certain school that's hitting it out of the ballpark, well, let's recognize that and let's say, what are you doing? I mean, if somebody's getting great results and maybe that we could be learning from that and implementing the same strategies, well, then we want to know that. And so this diocese was very proactive about saying, these instructional decisions need to be made at the classroom level and for the individual student. And then it's maybe how we can help support is to track those strategies and then share with the group how things are actually working. Kind of some of it is trial and error right now because we've never found ourselves in a position like this. All right, so there are two different pieces of information that I want to walk through with you. This is a color-coded data wall or a data dashboard, however you want to refer to it. And I have many, many colleagues that I have worked with that are intimidated and not comfortable, and they just kind of get glossy-eyed and tune out when we start talking about numbers and standard deviations and percentiles, and those things. So I also have incorporated color to this chart, so that kind of just at a quick glance, so that people who are not comfortable with the numbers don't have to get overwhelmed, and engage in that process. They can kind of see what is working and what is not. So the top half, or I guess I should say the top 2/3 of this chart, are focused specifically on SAT scores. And those SAT and PSAT scores. And now those are from 2020, the fall of 2020, through the winter of 2021, so December, so even just a couple months old. And it's important to point this out. And we feel, because it is, the Catholic Church is called to do an excellent job. And when we talk about that academic excellence and outperform kind of the norm, we need to be better. And so the goal that we use with the schools that we work with, and this is a stretch goal, we're realistic about it. It's not going to happen overnight. It's just kind of the target. And I always feel better when I know what I'm working towards, to kind of have a measure of that. That definitely helps me plan. So we're going with the goal in this diocese that 80% of our high school students taking the SAT should meet or exceed the benchmark in both evidence-based reading, writing, and math. So if you look at the key, blue means we're exceeding that target, so above 80% of our students. Green is we're 80% or higher. I'm sorry, blue is 90% or higher. The meeting that standard is in the 80% or higher. And then approaching would be kind of that, if half of our students or more are working towards being proficient, then we're approaching. If less than half of our students are not meeting that standard or that benchmark, then we're saying it's kind of an area of concern. And for some reason, we need to really roll up our sleeves and try to figure out what's happening there. So that kind of explains the top 2/3. And I'm going to pose some questions here in a second for you to look at. But if you're a high school person, and that's kind of secondary is where you align, definitely focus on that top part. The lower third is Edmentum scores from this year. So we have a fall, kind of when we're like back in full force. We had all of our students. We weren't doing virtual anymore. So we did the fall sampling, and then we have a winter sampling. And this is the same thing, looking at that proficiency level and saying that 80% of our students, and this is K-8, most of our buildings in this diocese are K-8, taking this Edmentum assessment should meet or exceed the proficient level in each core subject area. So we broke it down by, and again, this is all of the K-8 students in the diocese, and up above is all of our high school students in the diocese, because we wanted to kind of start there. So just take a moment. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to a minute, and I know that's not much time, but I can definitely send you this PowerPoint so that you can kind of go back and peruse it for your data viewing pleasure. But just kind of take a look at this and tell me what you notice. Just be thinking, if you want to jot some things down or just kind of have it in your head, what do you notice with this? I know, and I'll kind of point you in that direction. What do you notice between the evidence-based reading and writing scores and the math scores for the high school? And then what do you notice in particular with kind of looking closely at the reading, language arts, and mathematics scores for all? This is K-8 combined. Perfect. And again, I know we're moving through this quickly. it is obvious just based on color alone. So you don't have to be a numbers person to quickly see that our high schools in this diocese are strong in English, and they are definitely weaker in mathematics. There were a lot of greens and blues for that whole English strand for looking at every time that students took the test. And there was lots of reds and yellows for the mathematics. So right away at the diocesan level, and this diocese actually has 4 high schools that are part of it, we're recognizing, wow, okay, this is an issue. Math is an issue at the secondary level. And then it was also interesting because then as we kind of looked at the elementary level, math was also the lowest academic area for our K-8 buildings. So it makes sense that as a diocese, we might want to start talking about some math best practice quickly and sooner than later, and thinking about kind of some approaches to that. So mathematics is also, I wanted to know, is improving the slowest in the K-8 buildings. So it's the lowest area and it's showing the slowest gain, or the smallest gain throughout the school year. So what we know is if we don't do something sooner than later, that gap is going to continue, and we are going to be losing students that are not going to be making those proficiency standards. Okay, so then we dial it down, and remember kind of that funnel that I showed you. So then it kind of goes to the building level. And this is high school A. I took the name off, but this is one of the high schools in this diocese. And we wanted to break it down for them more specifically and say, okay, we had the diocesan results, and this is now where we are with this particular high school. It wouldn't make the most sense to say, okay, maybe we can't just assume that everybody, all 4 high schools, math was the lowest area. So we wanted, each building to kind of break that down and look at that. However, all 4 high schools, math was the lowest area, I can tell you that. But there are a couple of bright spots in this building. So you can see that there's, lots of yellow, there's a red, there is a nice blue there. There was an uptick in November of 2021. 100% of the 11th graders that took that assessment were proficient in comparison to the 77% level proficiency in the diocese. So that particular high school kind of hit it out of the ballpark for that testing session. And so when I look at that, I'm thinking, let's have, I want to know, what did they do differently? And then going down below, you'll see where we actually broke the math out into the different portions of the assessment there. We had the math test score, so actually the overall score, and then we looked at how did we perform with algebra, how did we perform on the problem solving and data analysis portion of the test, and how did we perform with the section is called Passport to Advanced Math. And so what we did is we wanted to look and say, in each of these sub scores, how did our score compare to that of the national average? And so you'll see that there's a number that's lined up there next to the year, and that's how we were either below or above or at the same level as the national average. And so we kind of color coded that out. We were able to do kind of a net gain or loss for each one of those subtests, and then you can kind of see the net score there in red or yellow. So when you're looking at this, and we know that Catholic schools are to be distinguished by excellence, but we went through a pandemic too. So we know that we have to, if we're going to continue to strive for that, we need to definitely make sure that we are kind of unifying our efforts. So we also know that the Catholic institutions, we should outperform the average institution. So what do you notice for this high school? If you were a teacher or a department, the math department, looking at this, what are some of the things that stand out? So we confirmed that mathematics is the weakest subject in the diocese and at this particular high school. And I already told you that it was actually the weakest subject in all 4 high schools. The weakest area in the mathematics at this particular high school is the advanced math. So we are recognizing that our students either, and there's kind of more questions that we need to answer, but they're either not taking the advanced math courses, and maybe that is a result of the pandemic, that students just because of online or remote learning or hybrid learning, they decided not to take those advanced courses just because it was, they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to be as successful, or they're taking those courses, but for whatever reason, maybe the learning modality didn't equate to higher levels of proficiency in those advanced classes. So we can see that that's an issue in this particular high school A. I also want to look at one of the elementary schools within this diocese, because one of the first questions that the high schools asked was, well, how are the elementaries performing, because they're sending us their students. And although a valid point, we need to look at that as an entire diocese and say, is this, are we seeing this through the entire diocese? And the answer, as you're looking at this, was yes. So again, what do you notice? Take a moment and look at the domains there within the mathematics of the Admentum assessment and tell me what you see or what you notice. I mean, the great news is they're making gains. So the level of proficiency in the fall to the level of proficiency in the winter is definitely moving in the right direction. But I also know that this school is not satisfied with half or a little bit less than half of their students meeting the standard. And so they're only anticipating that they need to up that proficiency, and they had to make some decisions about where to target math instruction between the January testing date and then they're going to assess again in the middle of May. And how do we continue to make sure that our students are making the gains that they need to make from a proficiency standpoint? So what do you notice? Perfect. Geometry was the smallest gain this year, and only 43% of the students are proficient at this time. So smallest gain and lowest proficiency percentage. And then algebra and expressions is the second lowest gain, and only 47% of the students are proficient at this time. So kind of posing that to the teachers and having some conversations and saying, if these are the facts, this is what we know. It's whether we like it or not, it's the reality. And so how do we respond to that? And so working with this particular staff, they wanted to dial it down to the grade level, and they're a one section building, so one class for every grade level. They wanted to dial it down and say, if I'm the teacher, I want to say, and I'm teaching second grade geometry, how am I doing? Where am I falling? How am I contributing to the overall proficiency of our building and within our diocese? So we were able to then dial it down. As remember, we kind of talked about running it through that funnel and looking very closely at this. You can see that in geometry in particular, there's a certain grade level that's posing a bit more of a challenge in that area. And you'll see that the middle school 7th and 8th graders are doing extremely well with algebra and expressions. And so their levels of proficiency are solid. And that would make sense to me because 8th grade is primarily an algebra year. So we would be expecting the highest level of proficiency there, but they're definitely doing a nice job. All right, so what we noticed and what we talked about as a staff when we were kind of dialing this down and looking at each individual classroom, Most of the K-6 students had not had, if any, geometry or algebra at that point in the school year when this assessment was given, as we were kind of tracking and having these January conversations, because of the way that the textbooks are lined up. It was so much of it was focused on numbers and operations. And, you know, teachers were vocalizing, and I'm sure you've seen this, you know, introducing long division or multiplication or some of those things that just don't learn, the students just don't learn them overnight. And so they were finding, especially because of the learning gaps and kind of missed opportunities for the last 2 years in certain areas, they felt that some of these heavier number and operations topics were taking much longer than what they had, you know, initially planned for. And so it obviously would benefit the students to make sure that there's instruction in those areas before the end of the school year. It's so easy as a teacher to kind of put your head down and stay the course, and you're living it every day, and you're like, I just got to do this, I got to do this. But sometimes we need to take a step back. The teachers that have actually kind of paused some of the more difficult numbers and operations concepts, and they built in kind of geometry. It was like a breath of fresh air, kind of something new for them to teach, and kind of a break for the kids. They really felt that that was going to be a good strategy for them. So, and they were also thinking that if we can continue to make sure that geometry and algebra are being addressed, this building is really contributing to the solid foundation that's going to be needed to help drive some of those higher level math courses for the SAT that are helping create success on the SAT for the math departments at the high schools, and looking at how do we, you know, if we can really build that foundation, more kids are going to excel in math, and they're probably going to be more likely to take those advanced math courses. And again, I mentioned that the 7th and 8th grade are doing really well in algebra and expressions, and that makes sense. But it definitely would benefit the 8th graders to review some geometry from the 5th through 7th grades prior to the end of the school year, just because their textbook does not have geometry in it. So when we're looking at taking the time to do this, and I know it's frustrating because you're so busy and you have so much going, but the efforts will pay off. However, if we gather this information, or this information is provided for us, and we just kind of like say, here it is. And I know that this happens in many buildings, is somebody that the data coordinator prints off the packet for each teacher, hands the teacher the packet, and it just gets lost in the pile on the teacher's desk, and they just don't make time to look at it. So in that sense, the data by itself is useless. If we are going to continue to assess students on the Edmentum or the NWEA map, or iReady also does the 3 assessments throughout the school year. If we're going to continue to take the time and assess students, but not do anything with that information, it's useless, it's pointless. The data is only going to be useful if we apply it. Students start to take a much more much more pride in that assessment if they know that the teachers are going to be using that information. I would always explain to my students that I'm using this to figure out what you already know as a student, so that I'm not trying to bore you, but that I know what we really need to focus on. And that's like what a coach does. I always say, you know, I'm a basketball coach and I lost a game because my students, their free throw percentage was like a 30% from the free throw line. What am I going to have them do at practice the next day? Well, guess what? They're going to be shooting a whole lot of free throws. So just wanting to make sure that, you know, weighing the pig does not make it fatter, but we actually have to take this information, and it can be so beneficial to our classroom instruction. So where I will leave you again is then the action. What action did the teachers take as we ran all this down, and then we were able to collaborate on kind of the united front with the efforts, and then giving some of that back to the diocese to say, how can we leverage our resources? Sometimes together, together is better. We can do more, we have more purchasing power. We can get better deals if we all kind of work on some of this together. So the high school math department in this diocese, these were, and this is not all by any means, but these are kind of 4 things that they came up with that they really wanted to address when it came to looking at that passport to advanced mathematics. They wanted to review the sequence of math courses. It was important for them to say, do we have the right things in the right places, and are we really encouraging students, or are we providing enough opportunities for students to take these math courses? They wanted to develop some SAT review and practice opportunities. So looking at some organizations that do some of that great work. Khan Academy does some things. Think Tank does some great work with that as well, and kind of trying to identify those and saying, how can we build those opportunities in? Talking to students. I mean, that's a great way to, the students will tell you whether you like it or not, but they'll be brutally honest about why, they felt students weren't interested in taking the higher level math courses. You can't fix it if you don't know what the problem is. And so really trying to do some surveying and talking to students in that aspect. And then they really made a good decision about, they said it's important that we review our SAT sample questions and then look at our course assessment questions. So whether it's the chapters or our exam questions, and ensure that they're formatted the same. If we know, and whether we like it or not, we know the students need to take the SAT. And so trying to set them up to be as successful as possible. And they said, we should just look and make sure that we're using the same language, the vocabulary is the same, the formatting is the same. So the more the kids see it and work with it, the less intimidating it will be, and the more comfortable they'll be in the actual assessment. And then the K-8 school, they decided that they were going to do some do now activities to review prior grade level geometry and algebra standards. And if you're not familiar with a do now, it's kind of like the first initial task at the start of a math period. So students are coming in or they're transitioning, and the teacher puts up a do now. So some sort of review from the grade level before to kind of activate that prior knowledge in those 2 areas. They wanted to look at their scope and sequence to make sure that all the domains are being taught, regardless of the textbook being used, and just making sure that the diocesan standards in their math curriculum was indeed covered. And if it wasn't covered in their textbook, what other resources were they going to pull in to make sure those things were covered? Again, aligning the standards to the textbook, making sure there's no gaps or holes. And then Edmentum provides a great resource through the learning path that is personalized to each individual student. And so this building committed to saying we're going to leverage some of our instructional time for 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week to really focus in on the individual student and where those gaps are. And then the teacher during this time is also pulling individual students and really focusing in on where they can actually do some reteaching or kind of do some sort of review game with the students. And we're really hoping that with these efforts, those scores in May will definitely be higher for this elementary building. And like I said, it's a process. So between the SAT and the Edmentum scores, we're hoping that we're working smarter and not harder, and our instruction definitely is in the best interest of the students as far as what their learning needs are. And then the hopes is that then that definitely helps us feel more fulfilled as a teacher. And the teachers that I've had conversations with, they have said yes, like we finally feel like we're being very purposeful and focused, and it's making a huge difference in our classroom. So that's exciting as well. Thank you so much for participating. If you have any questions, my email address is right here on the slide. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or kind of talk through some things with you. And then also our company website is www.theadac.com. And I'd love for you to check that out as well and see what other services that we might be able to help you with. Thank you so much for participating. Take care.